Humanitarian groups have been sounding the alarm about how Russia's war on Ukraine has triggered a global food crisis. Many countries depend on shipments of grains and fertilizer from the war-torn nation. Some African countries were already facing famine-like conditions before this conflict, and now they're being hit particularly hard. It's partly because Russian officials are blocking vital goods at Ukraine's Black Sea ports. Yet some African leaders who have political and economic ties with Russia have not condemned Russia's invasion. Well, today, the African Union chair and Senegalese President Macky Sall was in Sochi meeting with Mr. Putin about this very issue, and he says he has high hopes the two can cooperate and resolve this crisis. Jude Moore is a senior policy fellow at the Center for Global Development. He joins me now from Washington. Jude, great to see you. Thanks so much for joining us. I have to say, seeing Macky Sall with President Putin, I mean, it gives sort of a big question about whether they can find a way forward and whether Macky Sall has any sway to try and convince Putin to open up those supply chains. What do you think?
Yeah, again, thanks, Eleni, for having me. I think so. I think, African governments have not condemned Russia en masse. In fact, subsequently, some African governments have abstained from UN resolutions. Some of them have voted, like Eritrea has voted against them. So because of that, compared to, say, Europe or the United States, the representative of the African continent at that level, who is now Macky Sall, chair of the AU, has some leverage to see if there can be some negotiated settlement to the crisis in Ukraine, because there's only a diplomatic out. There's no way to actually end this militarily.
Yeah, and it's so interesting that you mentioned that so many African countries have not condemned Russia's invasion of Ukraine. And I guess that brings up the question, is Vladimir Putin really pro-releasing supply and helping African countries? Do you think this is a show of force? Because we have to be honest here. We know Sergei Lavrov has actually mentioned the fact that African countries in the past have been ostracized. They need a bigger voice at the UN table. So it's almost like Russia was going to pull the African card at some point. And do you think that this might be it?
Not only that, very high-ranking Russian official who supposedly has access to Putin has talked about how food crisis in places like Africa would actually, spur some sort of surge in migration and coming to Europe. So on the one hand, it seems as if Russia is advocating that Europe is somehow responsible for this. And so it's not clear if Macky Sall is going to convince him. But again, Africans comprise maybe a fifth of the global population, and it makes sense that something happening outside Africa that has such significant impact, African leaders would do what is in their power to attempt to sway which powers can be swayed, which individuals can be swayed to be able to do this. So I think it's important that the African leaders are taking this step, and who knows, they might be the ones to be able to push this to where we get some sort of settlement.
Yeah. I want to give the audience a sense of what kind of supply and price shocks Africa could experience. We've been talking so much about gasoline prices increasing in the US and inflation increasing in other parts of the developed world, but it's actually developing economies that are really going to be experiencing excruciating pain.
Yes. So one is, we talk about fuel prices, right? So some countries in Africa, like Nigeria, Gabon, Angola, might benefit from high prices in petroleum products, but most of the continent are net importers. So high fuel prices is going to have significant impact on them. Now, most Africans, especially sub-Saharan African countries, do not really eat a lot of wheat products, but they eat other grains, especially like rice. Now, because of the decline in wheat supplies and the pressure on wheat prices, it is beginning to affect other African staples. And that is the issue. So today, there were news and rumors that India was considering curbing rice exports. Vietnam and Thailand were considering curbing rice exports. Even though the Indians have denied it, this carries significant consequences for the continent because, as you noted in your opening, in the eastern part of the continent, there has been, especially in the Horn of Africa, 4 successive failures of the rains, and it looks as if there's going to be a 5th. So it is on both fuel and food prices that we're seeing the impact happen. So it might not directly be wheat, but it is the impact of wheat, the shortage in wheat on other grains that is having such devastating impact on the availability and food security across the continent.
Yeah. Yeah, you're painting a dire scenario very quickly. There's a lot of talk that you could see the rise of alternate powers coming to the fore, and that Africa has a very unique opportunity. African countries have unique opportunity to pick sides. Do you believe that?
I see that. I think African leaders have been really clear about this. It is not in Africa's interest. The gaps, the scale of the challenges the continent faces, that scale cannot be met by any single partner. And so African governments are going to do everything in their power to retain a diversity of partners. I think that is what undergirds their, sort of hesitation to completely come out and condemn the Russians. I think they're going to try to keep their relationships with Europe, the United States, Russia, and China. Unless it actually is completely unavoidable, African countries are going to try not to choose or pick any one side.
Yeah. Julia, thank you very much. Really good to have you on the show. Much appreciated.
Pleasure.